Welcome back to another deep dive. Our mission, as always, is pretty straightforward. We grab the sources you give us, maybe articles, notes, research, you name it, and we really dig in. We're trying to pull out those key insights, those sort of aha moments. Basically, a shortcut to getting up to speed without feeling totally buried.
Yeah, exactly. And today, we've got a really powerful mix of sources. We're looking at parts of the book of Acts, specifically about an apostle's experience, facing some serious trouble in a Roman city. Then we've got verses from the Psalms focusing on divine kingship, a very different kind of authority.
Right.
And there's also a passage from the Gospel of John, plus a reflection piece that ties into themes of grief, but also hope.
Okay, so it sounds like a diverse set, but maybe with some connecting threads.
Definitely. We'll be exploring themes like navigating opposition, how you find assurance when things get tough, that whole contrast between human authority and, divine authority, and maybe the most powerful theme running through it all. This journey from deep sorrow to a really profound, lasting joy.
Sounds like a lot to unpack. Let's jump in. Where should we start? Maybe with that scene in Acts.
Yeah, let's start there. Acts 18. Picture Paul in Corinth. It's a big, important Roman city, bustling, complex. He's there trying to share his message.
And it's not exactly smooth sailing, I gather.
Not at all. The sources describe a challenging environment, but right when things seem intense, he gets this divine message, a vision.
Ah, right. I remember seeing that quote. The Lord tells him, "Do not be afraid, but speak, and do not be silent."
Yeah, and crucially, "For I am with you, and no man shall attack you to harm you, for I have many people in this city."
That specific phrase, "I am with you," plus the promise of protection.
Yeah.
That must have been huge.
Absolutely. It seems very direct, very specific to his situation right there in Corinth. And the text shows it had a real effect. Because of that assurance, it says he stayed there. How long was it?
1 year and 6 months, teaching the word of God among them.
1.5 years. That's a serious chunk of time. Seems like that vision really anchored him there.
But it didn't mean the problems just vanished, right? The opposition still came.
No, exactly. The promise was about harm, not necessarily avoiding conflict altogether. The source says, when Gallio was proconsul of Achaia, the Jews made a united attack upon Paul and brought him before the tribunal.
Okay, so Gallio is the Roman bigwig for the area.
Yeah, the governor, essentially. And the tribunal is the official Roman court. So they're bringing Paul before the Roman legal system.
And what's its charge?
It's specific. This man is persuading men to worship God contrary to the law. They're trying to frame it as a public order issue, something Rome should care about.
Okay, so how does Gallio, the Roman proconsul, react? This seems like a critical moment.
It really is, and his response is fascinating. Paul's apparently ready to defend himself, but Gallio cuts him off.
He doesn't even let him speak.
Nope. He basically says, look, if this was about actual crime, wrongdoing, or vicious crime, then sure, I'd listen. But since it is a matter of questions about words and names and your own law, see to it yourselves, I refuse to be a judge of these things.
Wow. So he just dismisses it, throws it out.
Completely. The text says he drove them from the tribunal, washed his hands of the whole religious dispute.
That's pragmatic, maybe? Or just indifferent?
Could be either, or both. He saw it as an internal Jewish matter, not Rome's business. But then the source adds this really disturbing detail right after.
Oh, what happens next?
It says, and they all seized Sosthenes, the ruler of the synagogue, and beat him in front of the tribunal.
What? Right there, after Gallio dismissed them.
Right there, and the text adds, but Gallio paid no attention to this.
He just ignored it.
Yeah.
A man being beaten right in front of his court.
That's what the source says. Paid no attention. It's quite telling. It really highlights the tension, the potential for violence when authority just steps back.
Definitely. So Paul witnesses all this. Does he flee immediately?
Surprisingly, no. The text actually says he stayed many days longer after that incident.
Huh. Even after seeing that violence and Gallio's indifference.
Yeah. Before he eventually sailed for Syria. There's also that detail about him cutting his hair at Cenchreae because of a vow he'd taken. Seems like some level of normal life resumed before he left.
So, thinking about this whole episode, it raises questions for us, doesn't it? Like, how do you find courage when facing opposition like that?
Yeah. Especially when it feels official or threatening.
What happens when your beliefs bump up against the legal system or the governing powers?
Right. And what are the consequences, good or bad, when those in power decide not to intervene, like Gallio did? It leaves a vacuum, doesn't it?
It certainly did in that case.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the scene with earthly authority. limited, maybe detached.
Yeah.
But you mentioned the sources give us another perspective on authority from the Psalms.
Yes, exactly. Psalm 47 offers this huge counterpoint. If Gallia represents limited earthly power, well, this psalm talks about ultimate divine power.
Okay, so how does it frame it?
It's just unambiguous from the start. For the Lord the Most High is awesome, a great king over all the earth, not just a province like Achaia, but everything.
Over all the earth. That's a big claim compared to a local proconsul.
Huge difference. And it describes God's active power. He subdued peoples under us and nations under our feet. It talks about God choosing their heritage. It's language of complete sovereignty.
Is there imagery involved?
Oh, yeah. There's this powerful image of God ascending. God has gone up with a shout, the Lord with the sound of a trumpet. It sounds like a coronation, a victory celebration on a cosmic scale.
And the response isn't legal arguments like before Gallia.
No, the response it calls for is worship. It repeats, sing praises to God, sing praises to our King, sing praises. And again, for God is the King of all the earth, sing praises with a psalm. It's an insistent call to recognize and praise this ultimate King.
So if we put the Corinth scene next to this psalm, what's the takeaway? How does understanding God as this great King over all the earth change things?
Well, it totally reframes the encounter with someone like Gallia, doesn't it? You might be facing a local official, maybe one who's indifferent or whose power is limited, but recognizing that there's a higher king, one whose authority is absolute and universal, it shifts where your ultimate trust lies. It gives you a different, a much bigger perspective on those immediate challenges.
Okay, that makes sense. It puts earthly power in its place, so to speak.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned the sources also talk about something more internal, sorrow and joy.
Yes. This is a major shift in focus from external conflict to inner experience. And it comes through really strongly in the Gospel of John passage, chapter 16. And it's echoed in Psalm 126 in that reflection piece.
So what's the core message there?
John 16 puts it incredibly directly. Jesus says, "Truly, truly, I say to you, you will weep and lament, but the world will rejoice. You will be sorrowful."
Okay, acknowledging the reality of sorrow first.
Yes, validating it. But then the promise, but your sorrow will turn into joy. That truly, truly, it's like underlining it twice. This isn't a maybe, it's a guarantee. Sorrow is real, but the transformation will happen.
And there's an analogy used, right, about childbirth.
Yeah, it's a really powerful one. John 16.21. When a woman is in labor, she has pain. But when she's delivered of the child, she no longer remembers the anguish for joy that a child is born.
So the pain is intense, real, but forgotten in the face of the joy that follows.
Exactly. The pain isn't negated, but it's seen as like the necessary passage to that overwhelming joy. It gives the anguish a context, a purpose almost.
And what about the kind of joy that's promised? Is it just temporary relief?
No, that's the key thing in the next verse, John 16.22. So you have sorrow now, but I will see you again and your hearts will rejoice. Okay, so it's personal. I will see you again. It affects the core of your being. Your hearts will rejoice.
And the crucial part.
And no one will take your joy from you.
No one can take it away. So it's permanent, secure.
That's the promise. It's not just happiness that depends on circumstances. It's presented as a deep, unshakable, untakeable joy.
It's a powerful concept. And you said this theme appears elsewhere in the sources.
Yeah, Psalm 126 has this beautiful line. Those who sow with tears will reap with songs of joy.
Sowing with tears, reaping with joy. Same idea, different image. The hard, sorrowful work leads to a joyful outcome.
Precisely. And the reflection piece we looked at really ties these threads together. It talks about grief being like the seed of a deeper joy.
Ah, connecting back to the sowing image.
Exactly. It uses the mother's labor analogy again, too. And it stresses that this joy isn't just future happiness. It's described as eternal, grounded in our union with Christ.
Eternal joy, rooted in relationship.
Right. And the reflection encourages living with hope now, trusting that God is already working towards that rejoicing, even when you're right in the middle of pain. It reframes sorrow, suggesting it has this potential for transformation.
Okay, so this really pushes us to think, doesn't it? How do you hold on to that kind of hope when you're actually in the sorrow, when that future joy feels, frankly, impossible?
It's a real challenge.
And how does believing in this unshakable future joy actually change how you experience the pain now? Does it lessen it or just change its meaning?
Good question. And can we really see grief, as that reflection puts it, as having potential? Like a seed, or like labor pains, something difficult, but leading somewhere profound.
That idea of grief as a seed, that's something to mull over. Okay, so there's this promise of transformation, this secure future joy. Does that mean we just passively wait for it?
Well, that's where the next part of the John passage comes in, and it links to the prayer and the reflection, too. It talks about the active role of asking and trusting.
Asking?
Yeah, John 16:23 says, "In that day you will ask nothing of me." That sounds odd at first, but then it clarifies, "Truly, truly, I say to you, if you ask anything of the Father, he will give it to you in my name."
Truly, truly again. So another certainty. Direct access to the Father, asking in Jesus' name.
Right. It shifts the asking, you could say. And the prayer from the Psalm 126 reflection gives a concrete example of what that asking might look like during the sorrow.
What does it ask for? Not just for the pain to end, I assume.
No, it's more about sustenance within the pain. It asks, "Lord, help me believe in your promise that sorrow will turn into joy." It asks for strength. Strengthen my heart in moments of waiting and weeping.
Waiting and weeping acknowledges that part of the process.
Definitely. And it asks for connection. Let me cling to you when I feel lost, and for trust, and trust that joy is coming. Then it finishes with gratitude for that specific kind of joy. Thank you for a joy that no one can take away.
So the asking is for belief, strength, closeness, trust, the things needed to navigate the waiting period.
Exactly. It's asking for help in the journey towards the promised joy.
How does this idea of asking connect back to, say, Paul's situation in Corinth or the Psalm about the king?
Well, it seems like the thread connecting them all. When facing trials like Paul, you might ask for courage, for protection, trusting in God's presence as promised.
Okay.
When you're reflecting on God as the ultimate king, like in Psalm 47, you might ask for perspective, for reliance on his control, not Gallio's.
Right. Trusting the true authority.
And when you're in that place of sorrow described in John 16 or Psalm 126, you asked for the strength to endure, the faith to believe the promise that joy is coming. Asking becomes this active expression of dependence, of trust in the promises and the power described in these sources.
So it's not passive waiting, it's active reliance expressed through asking.
That seems to be the idea. And the reflection actually ends with a very practical nudge, bringing it right down to earth.
What's that?
It asks, how can you help someone who is grieving today hold on to the promise of joy?
So taking all this profound stuff and turning it immediately outwards, how do we apply it in relationship with others?
Yeah, it grounds the whole thing in compassion and practical action.
Okay, that's a good place to maybe start pulling it all together.
Yeah.
Let's recap the journey we took through these different sources.
Sure. We started with Paul in Corinth, right? Facing real opposition, dealing with earthly authorities like Gallio, who was powerful but also limited and ultimately detached.
But Paul had that divine assurance, I am with you, which kept him going.
Then we shifted perspective dramatically with Psalm 47, seeing God presented as the ultimate king over everything, which puts those earthly powers into a totally different context.
Right, establishing where ultimate authority and trust really lie.
And then we moved inward to that deeply personal promise from John 16 and Psalm 126 that sorrow, though real and painful, isn't the end of the story. It's destined to become this deep, unshakable joy.
Using those powerful images of labor pains and sowing tears to illustrate the transformation.
Exactly. And finally, we touched on our active part in this, the importance of asking, of reaching out in trust for strength, belief, and endurance along the way.
So it's a path from facing external pressures, recognizing ultimate authority, understanding the profound transformation of inner pain, and actively engaging through trust and asking.
Yeah, that captures the arc pretty well. From earthly courts to the heavenly king, from present sorrow to future secure joy.
Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive, here's maybe a final thought for you to consider, something to take away and wrestle with.
If that ultimate joy is truly promised, truly secure, unshakable, and if God really is the king over everything, how does knowing that, believing that, fundamentally change how you experience suffering or opposition or injustice right now? Not just hoping for the future, but how does it impact you in the midst of the difficulty itself?